You've asked questions, and now I have answers. In this video, we're going to answer some of the most commonly asked questions that we've never covered before about U.S. citizenship renunciation. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Henderson, and if you'd like to learn how Nomad Capitalist can help you with your citizenship plans or your holistic offshore plans, learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. In today's video, I wanted to cover a lot of the frequently asked questions that I've been asked about renouncing U.S. citizenship. This is something that I've personally done. I don't recommend everyone do it. I don't think you should do it to spite the government or to try and be angry, but I think that some people have legitimate reasons why it makes sense, and my goal as someone who's not a theorist on this, but who's a real-world practitioner of this and who is living it right now, is to put out actual information that's not theory, but that's real-world information. So let's go through some of your questions. So the first question is one that is actually very common, not about renunciation. The goal is not to renounce, but the question is, if I, as a U.S. citizen, will I lose my U.S. citizenship if I get permanent residence in Canada? This is something I see time and time again. If you're a U.S. citizen, if you're the citizen of most countries, you are allowed to go and get temporary residence, permanent residence. You're allowed to leave the country for as long as you want. That does not mean you're giving up your citizenship. They're not going to take your citizenship. So renunciation is an act you have to actually go and do. You're not going to do it without knowing it. Now, there is a process where if you obtain another nationality and you do so with the intent of relinquishing U.S. citizenship, that can work. There are situations in which you take jobs in foreign governments, you do stuff like that, where some of that can take effect. But for the average person who's going out and getting residence in another country, PR, even another citizenship, holding residences is perfectly fine, holding other citizenships is perfectly fine. Now, there are countries that aren't the U.S. where you need to report your permanent residence or you need to report your dual citizenship. And there are a few countries like China, for example, and others, where dual citizenship is not allowed. Some countries it's technically not allowed, but tolerated. Other countries, they're really strict and people hide it. But from a U.S. perspective, leaving the country, moving overseas, I had a guy who lived overseas for 19 years, never came back. And then he recently moved back, and all is well. So that's not a problem. The second question is, if you renounce your U.S. citizenship, can you get it back? Now, we've talked about this before. The answer is no. It is a final act. The United States does not have citizenship by descent where you can go and claim through your parents or grandparents. They don't have a procedure to reinstate your citizenship. Other countries do. I think Australia has some provisions to reinstate your citizenship, for example. We mentioned that to someone who we helped a couple years ago. The United States, it's permanent, it's done. If you want to get your citizenship back, you can get in line with everybody else. You can find some way to get into the country, get a green card, wait at the naturalization time, apply, pay the fees, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the difference then is you would be a naturalized citizen, which means that, theoretically, they could go through and denaturalize you if you did anything wrong. If you're a natural-born citizen of the U.S. and you give it up, you're done, and you'll never get that status back. Now, the interesting question that I had to that is, what if you wanted to run for, what if you gave up your citizenship, got it back later through naturalization, and then wanted to run for president, for example? Could you claim you were a natural-born citizen? I don't think that someone who renounced would have a very good shot in politics, but this is what keeps me up at night. Next question. Now that you're a citizen of other countries, can you ever come back to the U.S. as a citizen of those countries? If so, how much time can you spend there? There's a couple different ways to go back to the United States. If you're Canadian, you don't really need to do anything. You just need to show up at the border. And so Canadians get 180 days. They have a very special relationship because of the land border. There are other programs called Visa Waiver Program countries, of which there are about 40. The UK, Australia, most EU countries, etc. If you have a citizenship in these countries, and we've helped people get passports from Estonia, the UK, New Zealand, Canada, a few others that I'm missing. Those folks, they just go online, they fill out a form called ESTA, and they can come back like everyone else. It's a 90-day visa-free policy. And so what's interesting is they actually email you at the end of the 90 days, like 80 days in, they send you an email like it's time to go. But you can come back for 90 days at a time, and haven't heard too many people have problems with that. If you're not from Canada or a visa waiver program country, you'll need to go and get a visa. So that could be a B1, B2 tourist visa. You could go and start a business in the U.S. Maybe you already have a business physically in the U.S. There are other types of visas you can get. So there are many different ways to come back. Can you come back to visit? Yes. B1, B2 visa is generally 180 days at a time. However, you want to make sure that you don't get sucked back into the U.S. tax net. Whether that was your reason for leaving at all in the first place, it would be a shame to at least get that as a fringe benefit and then still be paying tax on your worldwide income. What I always tell people is there is no guarantee. The only way that you're absolutely guaranteed to be let into a country is to be a citizen. Now, most of us are used to traveling around the world. Right now, I'm in Colombia, for example. I never sweat when I'm flying into Colombia that they're not going to let me in because I stay within the laws. I never overstay, or in certain countries, I'll get a residence permit. But heck, countries don't even have to let their permanent residents in many cases. So citizenship is the one way that they basically have to let you in. Even if you show up in the United States without a passport, it's going to take them a while to process you, but they do eventually have to let you in. So that's the one thing that obviously you lose when you're not a citizen of a country. Only the countries you're a citizen of have to let you in. In the case of most countries, we don't worry about it. In the case of the U.S., obviously they're a bit more strict. The next question. Do you have to be outside of the U.S., outside of the United States to renounce your U.S. citizenship? Yeah, because how would they get rid of you otherwise? You have to go to an embassy or a consular post in a foreign country. You cannot renounce from within the United States. Now, I think the closest you can probably get is Tijuana. There's probably some others that are pretty close. Vancouver, I suppose. So there are some that are, you just step over and you can get it done, but you do need to be outside of the United States. Can you renounce your only citizenship? In the case of the United States, you can. Every embassy functions a little bit differently. Some embassies obviously process a lot more renunciations. There was a big brouhaha a number of years ago about how the wait to get an appointment to renounce in Canada was over a year at some of the consular posts. Whereas at other consular posts, you could go in this week. And so there are some where they do hundreds of these, and there are some where they haven't done one in years. And so everyone has their own interpretation. It's really like any other situation in life. When you go to get on the plane for your flight, the gate agent has total control. If she says you can't take that bag, it doesn't matter if the bag fits within the terms and conditions. And so I think that I have heard some stories of people or of consular officers at certain embassies where they really don't want to process a renunciation for someone who could become stateless. However, it is possible. There are people who have done it. Not every country allows you to become stateless, but the United States somewhat does. And there's some interesting questions there as to if you didn't have residential status anywhere, what would happen to you eventually. But the interesting thing from my perspective is the United States, obviously a pretty formidable country. And so I don't know how many other countries would bully them to take back their former citizens if you had nowhere to go. If I give up my U.S. Citizenship, I'm going to give up my Social Security income. Social Security, no. Other government benefits, yes. Medicare generally is only for U.S. residents. I'm not a Medicare expert, but I generally think that even if you're living overseas, you wouldn't qualify for Medicare. You could always, as a citizen overseas, you could always come back and requalify. But Social Security income does not go away. Other government benefits, the person also asked about SSI. I imagine certain disability income would go away, not an area that I'm particularly focused on. But basically what you should look at it as, if you paid into it, you can get it. Now there's certain countries where the U.S. won't send Social Security income. You could have a U.S. bank account to collect it in theory. Medicare, obviously, it's a healthcare program for people who are living in the country. Disability, other benefits, those are things that are provided to people who live there. So Social Security, when you retire, if it's still there, you can get. Everything else pretty much no. Will a person's criminal record, next question, will a person's criminal record be a hindrance to renouncing U.S. citizenship? No, but you're still going to have a criminal record. You cannot give up your U.S. citizenship to avoid being prosecuted for a crime or to avoid a civil lawsuit. Everything else stays as it is. What's interesting about the United States, and I think it's not a bad thing, is there are not a lot of distinctions other than the ability to live in the country between citizens and non-citizens. People can own property, citizens or non-citizens. You can bank citizens or non-citizens. You can do a lot of stuff. The government does not really make a distinction for many different activities the way many other countries do. Now, the banks may be more skittish to take someone who has no connections to the country, or the banks may not want to give you as favorable mortgage terms because they don't know where to track you down for the payment. But, you know, everything's going to be the same after you renounce. That said, to the question, you know, they really can't stop you from doing that. There's been a couple kind of clickbaity stories where they said, oh, they refused the person's renunciation. They can technically refuse for a technical error, but really, you can be a criminal, that's fine. Now, the problem is you're going to be a criminal, someone with a criminal record, and you're going to have a harder time going to other countries, getting resident status, and obtaining other citizenships in the future. So you want to take that into account, but that's not necessarily an issue. Now, there are situations where if you have certain obligations, you may not be able to get a passport to even leave. So in that case, I think child support and back taxes, there may be situations where if you're on parole or something, you can't get a passport. So if you can't leave the United States, then you can't renounce. But from the perspective of the State Department and the actual renunciation procedure, there are no restrictions. Just understand that you're not going to clear the slate. You're not going to clear any military obligations. You're not going to clear any debts. You're not going to clear any restitution. You're not going to clear any criminal record. You know, if 10 years down the line, if you've renounced, you go to a place where you need to get an FBI report, they'll get you an FBI report. But it's not like the slate has been wiped clean, that you're no longer a criminal. And so the last question is, can I switch my residence permit, if I live overseas, from U.S. citizen to a new citizenship? So this is a situation that we deal with a lot, where we have a lot of clients who they're living in the United States and they want to move overseas, whether they want to renounce or not. Most of them don't. We also have people who already live overseas in Hong Kong, Singapore, a couple other places, London, where they say, hey, you know, I've got a residence permit here. Like I live in Hong Kong, I live in Singapore, you know, Asian countries where it's harder to get citizenship are more common. You know, Dubai could be another one. And they say, hey, I'm a U.S. citizen, how do I switch it over? In Asia, we've generally found it's possible to do. Now, you'll want to make sure there's some footwork that needs to be done, like things need to be done in a proper order, because you need to do step 1 and then step 2 and then step 3 and then step 4. You shouldn't do them out of order or you could have a problem, but it is doable. And that's something we've helped a couple folks do. There are other countries, often in Latin America, where it's not possible. So for example, I had a residence permit in Mexico. I wanted to use another citizenship, and the attorney convinced me, no, it'll be easier this way, and you can always switch it later. Now, in the case of Mexico, I could have switched it later, but it would have been actually a more involved process staying in the country and just switching it than actually just coming and getting a new residence permit. And so what happened is, you know, because I never switched it before I renounced, I wasn't able to enter the country as the nationality on the ID card. Any subsequent entry into Mexico, my ID card is now canceled, my resident status is canceled, I've got to do it all over again. So there are cases where, yes, it's possible, but it's tricky and you better put in the advance work. There are other countries where, no, it's simply not possible. So if you're working towards a second citizenship in one of these countries, obviously, you know, if that's your only second citizenship, you want to, you know, you'll want to get that one before you were to get rid of the original citizenship. But if you're working towards multiple second citizenships, you definitely want to think in advance of, you know, how strategically am I going in and acquiring these residence permits? How am I handling everything? There's a lot of delicate details that you want to handle. So sometimes is the answer to, is it possible? If you have other questions, leave them in the comment section below. I think I've covered all the questions that we've gotten over the last several months that we haven't already covered. If you have more, leave a comment below. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, Learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.